We're ready to go. I got the thumbs up. Welcome to those who have made the effort to be here today and to be in a place where the Lord is worshipped. There's so many places we can be on a Sunday morning. I appreciate each one who comes out to worship, and the Lord does too. Today, I'm not sure what the message is called. I had originally called it Knowing the Ending from the Beginning, but I've taken a couple of different approaches on what I wanted to say in the message. So you're going to get what you're going to get. Pretty much everyone has experienced some degree of astronomical challenges, unforeseen expenses, disappointments, grief, changes at some time. So I want to to remind you, and want you to be reminded that God has been with us all through it in the past. And He wants to be sure that it is well with your soul. We're going to look at the story of two individuals today on the road to Emmaus who had anguished hearts. Their hearts were warmed, and their eyes were opened, and their tears were dried. So often it seems that people live in a spiritual fog, unable to see clearly God's plan. It is my prayer that together today we will see fog lifted where it might exist, and that we will believe, see, and be excited about God's working in our lives. For those who are under stress today, or are needing a mental fog lifted, or spiritual fog cleared away, remember, God didn't bring you this far to abandon you. He did not do that. We need to be looking regularly for evidences of God. Looking for joy, examples of what is bringing you joy. I got out the other day and was really excited to see that there's some little purple blooms actually growing out in the front, what euphemistically called a garden, but seems to be our weed patch out there these days. But I got so excited. I just stood out there and I just thanked the Lord for the beautiful flowers. I think the crocuses, little purple ones, as you're leaving today, leaving the sanctuary, take note of those evidences of joy. And I'm going to also put on my joy hat today. I haven't used this in a while. Look for the joy in the little things of life, even in the trials and the tribulations of life. Look for the little evidences that joy is with you. This isn't part of the notes, and it's going to make the sermon just a little bit longer, but I think I just had to share this with you. On Friday, I had a joyful experience. Andrea just happened to be walking by the window here, and she was in the sanctuary, and she saw me flat on my back out in the yard. It had been raining and slippery, and I'd gone out there for a simple little project that I was wanting to do, and fell flat on my back. And I'd been there for several minutes when she came to get me, and I'm trying to figure out how to get up off the ground. Those who aren't in here, I don't walk very well, and so I didn't take my walker out with me, but I figured I was going out to pick up a few cans that the dogs had taken out into the backyard. So there I am. I'm really excited that that's their bathroom out there. And so there was a lot of excrement out there ready to be picked up because the snow has just kind of finished coming down, and I was excited. I didn't land right in it. And Andrea was able to come out, and it took us a bit of doing, but she figured out how to get me up off my back. And we didn't have to wash all of our clothing. But so even look at the bad things that happen to you, and you can still be laughing about it several days later. Having the joy of the Lord is your strength. Today we're going to be reviewing what happened on the road to Emmaus, which actually took place after the traumatic crucifixion and the emotional resurrection of Jesus. And on the same day, women found the tomb empty and reported back to the disciples. Luke chapter 25, verses 13 to 35, tells it like this. On the same day, two of Jesus' disciples were walking to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about all the things that had taken place. While they were discussing and analyzing what had happened, Jesus himself approached and began to walk with them, but their eyes were prevented from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing with each other as we're walking along?" They stood still and looked rather gloomy. The one whose name was Cleopas answered him, "Are you the only visitor in Jerusalem who doesn't know what happened there in the last few days?" He asked them, "What thing?" They answered him, "The events involving Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in what he said and did before God and all the people, and how our high priest and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and had him crucified. But we kept hoping that he would be the one to redeem Israel. What is more, this is now the 3rd day since those things occurred. Even some of our women have startled us as they told us they were at the tomb early this morning and didn't find his body there. So they came back and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who were saying that he is alive. Then some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women said. However, they didn't see him. Then Jesus told them, "Oh, how foolish you are! How slow you are to believe everything the prophets said. The Messiah had to suffer these things and then enter his glory, didn't he?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them all the passages of Scripture about himself. As they came near the village where the two men were headed, Jesus acted as though he were going on farther. But they strongly urged him, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening and the daylight is nearly gone." So he went in to stay with them. While he was at the table with them, he took the bread, blessed it, and broke it in pieces, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they knew who he was, and he vanished from them. Then they asked each other, "Our hearts kept burning within us as he was talking with us on the road and explaining the Scriptures to us, didn't they?" They got right up right away, went back to Jerusalem, and found the 11 disciples and their companions all together. They kept saying, "The Lord is really risen and has appeared to Simon." Then the two men began to tell what happened on the road and how they had recognized him when he broke the bread in pieces. God bless the reading of his word. Now there's a problem here, don't you think? What were the people doing? Jesus had told them just days before that he would be crucified and buried and would then rise to live again. But the apostles were all gathered together, grieving and mourning the death of Jesus, sort of like we do when family members or friends gather together to remember and to celebrate the life of the one who has passed on. Even in the face of such tragic news, it is also good news that the people had gathered together to comfort one another and to encourage one another, rather than going their separate ways. They may have also been in a fog of confusion, trying to figure out, now what? Where do we go from here? Does anyone have any ideas? Often we ask those very same questions today. The disciples who may have asked, were we duped? What about the report of the women? Did Jesus really leave that tomb? Where is he? Have you ever noticed that bad news and good news, questions and answers, sometimes walk side by side? Clearly it is bad news that there seems to be no indication that anyone had believed Jesus would be resurrected from the dead. Even to the point of disbelieving the word of the women and the angels who had spoken with them. After the women spoke with them, asking them, "Do you know who took the body?" In spite of the good news and the good witness of the women and the absence of the body, why is it that even though so many had sat under the leadership of Jesus and the teaching of Jesus for at least 3 years, why is it they saw and heard only what they wanted to see and hear, and did not comprehend his real purpose for being with them? Imagine the state of mind of the women, excited by what the angels had told them. Then shortly after, they were crushed by the ridicule meted out by the disciples, who regarded them as hysterical women speaking nonsense. We read in Luke chapter 24, verse 13, and the following verses, that sometime in the afternoon 2 persons had left the gathering in Jerusalem and were returning to their home village of Emmaus. One was called Cleopas, and the other remained nameless. There have been many thoughts put forth as to who that second individual was. I believe it's no accident that the unknown person was unknown. There was a reason for it. Just the same way as in mathematical equations, there's sometimes an unknown factor. And what do they call that unknown factor? X. So the unknown person is named X, referred to as X. And I have been failing to show you the PowerPoint pictures that my daughter so carefully took the time to put up. I'm sorry. There seems to be an unknown X factor going on in my brain right now. But that's okay. Each one of you are also known as X. We're going to look at that unknown individual with Cleopas as being named X. That unknown individual can be you. You don't know everything that God has to say to you, and some things may slip through the cracks a little bit. So, therefore, for today, we shall each be known by this as this unknown individual named X. X bears your name. So imagine with me Cleopas and X. They are trudging along a 7-mile long, dusty road, exhausted after an emotionally draining past couple of days, where they had experienced the death of someone dear to them. Their clothes would be disheveled. Perhaps their eyes were swollen from crying. With their sorrowful head looking down in sadness to the ground. From their vantage point, all they could see was confusion within words of sorrow, grief, disappointment, questioning and despair punctuating their conversation. As if in a state of deep mental fog, the fact is they were so deeply engrossed in grief and grief-centered conversation that it is doubtful that they were even aware of the surroundings as they walked along a road they had no doubt traveled many a time on happier days. A road that offered the sounds of the living, cattle in the fields, dogs barking, children playing in the yards dotted along the highway or the road, men and women going about their daily activities and calling out a cheerful, "Hi, how are you today? Hello." But Cleopas and Ek were so wrapped up in their grief that they didn't even recognize or realize another person, another stranger, had begun to walk with them. Knowing already the ending of the account of the events on the road to Emmaus, we know that that stranger was Jesus. From the vantage point of Jesus, he is excited. He's newly resurrected from the dead, and he's pumped with excitement. He's alive. His mission is complete, and he can hardly wait to show himself to his earthly followers. He walks along with Cleopas and X and discovers they are torn apart with grief, rehashing all that had happened in a relatively short period of time, 3 or 4 days. And now their hopes were seemingly dashed. As they said to him in verse 21, "We had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel." Can't you just hear them spitting out those words, "We had hoped"? We know from our vantage point that, yes, he did come to redeem Israel, and he did. He had done it. In verse 25, Jesus said, "How foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Christ have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" It's almost like him saying, "You mean that nothing I told you stuck in your brains? What's the matter with you?" In spite of his frustration and disappointment with them, verse 27 tells us that he patiently explained to them yet again what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. Think about that. These people and the apostles and other followers had all heard of that many times as they sat under the teaching of the priest in the temple and were taught the prophecy concerning the coming of Christ and what he was going to do. They had heard it over and over from the lips of Jesus himself. What is God doing through all of this? What is God doing through all of this? God is being patient with his stubborn and sometimes pig-headed people yet again. He is giving them yet another opportunity to open their spiritual eyes and their heart to the message of love and salvation. Now let's back up a bit. In verse 16, we read, and I quote, "But they were kept from recognizing him." But they were kept from recognizing him. It is my opinion that it was not God who kept them from recognizing him by keeping them in a fog and spiritual blindness. Nor does God help us keep us extras from recognizing him. You have probably heard people say, "I'll believe it when I see it." This is the seeing is believing attitude. We go through life looking at a very tiny radar screen that shows us only limited information and views. We can't see it. If we can't see it on our radar screen and in our mind, we don't believe it exists. God established the order of believe it first, and then you will see it. So yes, in a way, God prevents us from seeing him at work because of that order which he established, and which we do not typically want to follow. Even though Cleopas, X, and the others had seen God at work in the historical records of their people, they refused to believe what they had been told in prophecy. Therefore, they could not recognize or see what God's plan was, and that plan was actually going as planned. They just couldn't think outside of the box of their limited, finite radar boxes. Are we not often guilty of the same things? In all of this bad news, a bit of good news is that Cleopas and X were still, in spite of their grief, thinking of the needs of this stranger. The day was almost over. It was getting dark, and the road to Emmaus was not a place you wanted to be in the dark because of robbers, perhaps wild animals, and for sure, no street lights. When we're going through tough times, the reality of the situation is bad enough. Worse still is what we can imagine and conjure up in our minds. Jesus accepted the invite and sat down for a meal with them. It was probably a simple meal that was prepared since it was late and they'd been on the road for hours. Perhaps they sat down to some savory bread, some sauce, or a soup to dip the bread into, some cooling water to quench their thirst. Still, they did not recognize Jesus, and the dim light of the lantern on the table probably would not have helped a whole lot. However, God was at work as Jesus took the bread and gave thanks and broke it. Suddenly, their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. They had not recognized him before, because in their mind, he was dead. You don't generally expect to see a dead person up and walking and talking. They did not believe what he had said when he walked and talked with them because before the crucifixion, and therefore they did not see Perhaps in that instant they recognized a pattern, a gesture, a mannerism they had seen so many times when Jesus had sat down with them with a meal before he died. Perhaps they recalled in that instant the Last Supper with Jesus that they had shared with Jesus as he broke the bread and passed the cup of wine. Or perhaps even more importantly, the word Jesus shared as he spoke the scriptures to them, yet again, finally struck a chord within their spirits. And they were now believing until they could see. This believing and then seeing is probably accurate, because just as suddenly as Jesus had appeared on the road to walk with them, he disappeared, leaving them to exclaim in verse 32, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" Their spirits had awakened in belief. Incredible, isn't it? That even though God shows himself all around us, we don't see, because often our belief is too small. Suddenly, Cleopas and X realized that was what was on God's infinite radar screen was so much more than they had seen on their finite radar screen. They were beginning to understand that God had a plan all along, and they had refused to believe it. They got so excited that, in spite of the lateness of the hour, the darkness of the night, the weariness within their bodies, and the dangers on the dark road, they returned at once to Jerusalem to report, "It is true! The Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon." Wow! How excited they were! I encourage you to remember the times God has been with you through the long, dark journeys of your past. And he is with you through your journey of today and into the future. Recall the wonderful memories and times of rejoicing. Get excited. Have faith in God, even when you do not understand the what or the why or the how of what is happening and how God is working in your life and in your situation. Understand this final truth I'm going to share with you by Reverend Max Lucado. Faith is not the belief that God will do what you want. Faith is not the belief that God will do what you want. It is the belief that God will do what is right. I recommend you go into this day and into every day building up what I refer to as a joy reservoir. You keep all these little joy reminders, keep them in a storage bin in your brain so that they can come up again. Like my little joy experience the other day of not becoming a total disaster in dog excrement. I'll remember that for years to come. I got laughing so hard that impacted a little bit how my daughter was able to peel me up off the ground. Put these little joy reminders in your memory banks so that you can make regular withdrawal from them again. It is the belief that God will do the right thing. Go into this day with faith, peace, and joy, and thankfulness, grateful, and appreciation for what God has done. Amen and amen.